This is Larry Jordan, the host of the Digital Production Buzz. The following interview is an excerpt from a recent program. To hear the entire program, visit digitalproductionbuzz.com. Tim Smith has been with Canon for more than 25 years and serves as a senior film and television advisor. While he's a good person to talk about picking the right camera, he is an outstanding person to talk about picking the right lens, which is exactly what we're about to do. Hello, Tim. Welcome.
Hey, Larry. How are you?
We're doing great. And while I want to spend most of our time talking about lenses, I first need you to bring us up to date on Canon Cameras. What's the latest news on camera technology from, say, NAB to today?
Well, we have a huge NAB, actually. We've produced two new 4K cameras to our lineup, which includes the new C300 Mark II and a new camera called an XC10. The XC10 is actually getting ready to ship right about now. It should be seen in the wild in the next couple of weeks or so. And that's a really small 4K, fairly inexpensive $2,500 4K camera. Sort of the opposite of what we did in the past, where we created the 5D Mark IIs that seemed to do, which was this still camera that seemed to take such an interest in the moving image community, where this is more of a motion camera that's more designed like a still camera. But its primary function is to record motion, but it also does still. So it's sort of just the opposite, with a 10-power zoom, small, about $2,500. And then the bigger announcement, I think, was this new C300 Mark II, which isn't going to ship till about September, October. But this is our newest, biggest, baddest camera, 4K camera with internal recording and 15 stops of latitude and a whole new log curve. It's a wonderful camera, great low light capabilities, all that kind of stuff.
Okay, so we've talked about cameras, but the camera is no value at all unless you have a good lens in it. Is Canon doing anything new in lens technology?
We actually, oh my gosh, over the last couple of years, people do think of us as Canon Camera. In reality, we're Canon Lens. We're a lens company, and we have been since day one. And currently in the EOS line, there's over 60 lenses that you could put on your cameras. And in the cinema line of lenses, just in the last, a little over just 3 years or so, we've produced 12 cinema lenses in the last 3 years, anywhere from 14 millimeter to one we were shown at NAB, which is already a legend. It's a 50 to a 1,000 cinema zoom. So it's an enormous range in a single lens. Everybody laughs at that. It's
50
almost,
to 1,000 zoom. What is that? It's got to be the size of a howitzer. It's got to be giant.
You'd think. It's not, actually. It's only 15 pounds.
Wow.
It's very workable. It's really not that much bigger than our 30 to 300, which is a very common lens to be using in film and television these days. So it's a little bit bigger than that, with a built-in servo, motorized servo on it as well. So it's pretty practical. Now I think there's two so far, actually. It's a $70,000 plus lens.
Jeez.
And there's one at a company called Auto Nimbus here in Hollywood for rent. I know they purchased it. And there's one that I get to play with from time to time. But I think so far we're just looking at two. It'll be a few more months before there any real quantity of those in the world. But no, that's a legendary lens. And that's sort of where I think you go with this, is that we do make great cameras, but cameras have a shelf life. Lenses live forever and ever and ever. And, we have rental houses out there with $80, $90 million worth of lenses they've had for 30, 40, 50 years, and people still rent them. People still use them.
Well, I want to come back to that, because I had a chance to visit the Canon booth at Cinegear earlier this week when they were at the Paramount lot in L.A. Many Canon cameras come with permanently attached lenses. Since the lenses can't be removed or changed, should we even worry about them because they're locked to the camera?
Well, it sort of depends on what you're shooting. We have 1, 2, 3, 4. We have a good number, and all our SLRs are interchangeable as well. But we have a good number of cinema lens cameras as well that are interchangeable. Matter of fact, we make in both mounts, EF and PL. But the fixed lens cameras, like the XC10 or the XF product, they're really more made for news, documentary, event videography, those type of things. When it comes to narrative television or narrative filmmaking, it's really unlikely that a fixed lens is going to cover you. You really kind of do look for a lot of different lenses in order to do a major motion picture is always going to have a dozen different lenses to choose from and different focal lengths. Where the built-in zooms, the built-in zoom ones tend to be not as wide, maybe a little slower. They're not always as sharp. They're just very versatile, and that plays well into the documentary world.
Tim, this is Michael Horton here.
Michael.
I'm in charge of the stupid questions. So what's the difference between the cinema lenses and the other lenses? Can we put a cinema lens on a DSLR?
You can. They are designed a little bit differently. Let's go to resolution, which kind of plays into this. So in the motion world, there's all the buzz about 4K resolution and 4K resolution.
Yeah.
Should we go to more than 4K? But in the still world, 4K resolution is only 8 megapixels. Our phones have surpassed that. 4K is a motion term, but that doesn't mean the lenses are really proper for that. Now, we use still lenses constantly on our cameras. Canon makes a great line of still lenses, and they're used very specifically for different things. But a cinema lens is really designed so that edge-to-edge detail is sharp when instead of looking at an image that's being blown up to 8 by 10 or 11 by 14, you're looking at an image that's got to be sharp for 40 feet across so that you're sitting in a theater 8 rows back and there's detail from edge to edge. There's also no exposure drop off to any of the corners as well. So it's a lot more difficult to get a consistent image for that size of a screen, and that's sort of where cinema plays into it. You also want faster lenses and consistent f-stops. Where a still lens is designed where you pick an f-stop, take a shot, move on, maybe it's another f-stop for the next shot. You've got to be able to zoom or move through your range without seeing the shift in brightness because of an f-stop change. So you tend to have prime lenses in the cinema world that are theoretically similar, if not the same f-stop through the whole prime. So as you switch from a 14 to a 24 to a 28 or whatever, you have a consistent image. So it's a different. Punishment fits the crime. Motion pictures and narrative television is a little bit different than stills. That's not to say people aren't doing it. They are, but it has more to do with price sometimes than it does their personal choice. There's
a term I've heard called breathing. What does that mean in regard to a lens?
Breathing is when you're focusing. When you focus the lens, the subject moves maybe a little bit and you're following the focus. If the focal length or the magnification of it seems to shift a little bit because you're moving the glass, that's breathing. And in an ideal lens, in an expensive lens, it doesn't breathe. There's really two key terms in cinema zooms. One is called breathing, which is what we're talking about, the idea that as you can focus without reframing, without it moving. So if you're on one actor and you have to pull your focus to the other actor 5 feet away. Well, it's fine for the focus to move, but you don't want the image to change its aspect ratio. You don't want it to change its angle of view or its photo, so it doesn't look like it's been zoomed or went wider, which sometimes can happen when a lens breathes. And the other one is ramping. You don't want the f-stop to shift while you're zooming. And most lenses ramp at some point where maybe you picked an f-stop of 5 and you're at 60 millimeters, but you're going to zoom into 280 millimeters. Well, during that zoom, the f-stop has to change to compensate for the shift in the way the glass works. It's expensive to make sure it doesn't do that, but you don't want to see the lightness, the brightness of the image shift while you're zooming. So a lot of the money goes into making sure lenses don't breathe and they don't ramp.
You mentioned that there's been a lot of technology changes over the last couple of years. How has lens technology changed? Because glass has been glass for a long time.
It has, but we've had to step up to the resolutions and the new color science. Digital has changed the way we have to make a lens, but that doesn't mean you can't go looking for older lenses. A lot of filmmakers do. I just saw last weekend a film called Ex Machina, which was a great film shot on a Sony f/65, which was probably one of the highest resolution cameras that exists. But the cinematographer went back and got vintage glass from somewhere in the 70s to create a certain look. So he had to soften that information. But we now have to design a lens around a digital sensor and new color science. So it is a little bit different. But you're right about the basics haven't changed any. The older lenses are, in some cases, as popular as they ever were.
Is the process of making a lens still the same as it was for the last 100 years, pretty much by hand?
On cinema lenses, yes. There's not economy of scale when you're making a $200 or $300 lens. That's sort of done in a machine. But these 50 to 1000s are, hand polished and hand sanded and the whole process. So I think there's, at one point I think somebody told me there's only a couple of people even in their factory in Japan that even can do these lenses. They go on vacation and we just wait till they get back. It's a real art. So for the higher end ones, that's still very much made by hand. And also the materials have changed. The lead contents that you're allowed to put in glass have changed. So they've had to come up with different ways of creating glasses as some of the environmental laws have kicked in. So we've had to kind of deal with that over the years. There used to be a considerable amount of lead in the glass in cinema lenses 20 years ago, and that's just not acceptable anymore. So
well, you've been around.
That's changed as well.
You've been around. You've been using the lenses forever. I mean, are the lenses today better than they were 30, 40 years ago?
Oh, man. Technically, yes. But better, no. I mean, because it's really very subjective. One of my favorite lenses from Canon is it's a 28 millimeter, and it's a very slow lens, and it's one of our inexpensive lenses. One of the great things about this job is I don't buy them, but it's probably one of our least expensive lenses, and it's not one of the better lenses. But because it's got such a creamy look to it, such a non-perfect look to it, I like it a lot. So I use it for different things that way. And then there's other lenses that are just tack medical sharp, with just dead on. So, I think one of the things digital did over the last couple of years to filmmakers as they were transitioning from film to digital is it sort of took one of the options away from them. They used to be able to pick a film stock that would give them a certain look. And then they would pick a lens that would give them a certain look. Now everybody sort of has a digital sensor, and the looks are kind of baked into that particular company's sensor. So if you're shooting on a Canon or a Red or a Sony, you really look to your lens selection to help carve out that look. It doesn't always have to be sharp as a tack, and it doesn't always, and sometimes it should. And maybe you're doing a lot of green screen work, so that's a detail thing. But if you're doing a period piece from the 50s, you don't want it to look like Monday Night Football.
We have a live chat going on during our conversation, Tim, and Alex is asking, what's the difference between f-stops and t-stops?
Okay. It's how light is measured. So an f-stop is a physical opening. That's kind of used in the 35 millimeter world. So if you're looking at your aperture physically, how large is it, and that's measured. A t-stop is transmission. It's how much light is being passed through. It was just sort of the way the two industries went. There is a way to convert f-stops to t-stops so that you could get the equivalent number. But on a still lens, an f-stop is the physical measurement of the actual hole, the actual opening in the aperture. And on a cinema lens, we call it a t-stop, and that's the amount of light that's being transmitted through that hole. So that's an interesting question. We get that a lot because we make both lenses, and you can put a lens on one of our cameras that the lens is barreled in f-stops, but the camera is a cinema camera, so it wants to read in t-stops, and there's some software built in to do that translation for you.
One of the things we've been working with and wrestling here in our studio is trying to find the right lenses for the cameras that we've got, which caused me to discover something that I wasn't paying any attention to before, which is that there's different lens mounts. We have MFT mounts on our gear here. Canon, I think, makes EF mounts, and there's PL mounts. Why the different mounts, and does it make a difference in quality? And why can't you guys all do the same thing and make my life easier?
Yeah, like with codecs too.
From your lips to God's ears on the mount. So Canon owns the EF mount, and that's something we developed for our EF, our electronic focus cameras on the stills like the 5Ds and so on. And we're continuing to support that mount. But we also make the bulk of our glass in PL, which stands for positive lock. The PL mount in the film and television industry has been like a universal mount system forever. It's a good, sturdy, thick metal mount, which instead of where you twist the lens onto a front of a camera and it clicks into place, in the motion picture world, the lens always goes in perfectly level, and then you twist a mount around the lens that takes a bite down on it. They both have their positives and their negatives. It's really more about the economics of if you're a rental house with $10 million of the PL glass, how many non-PL cameras do you want to have in your rental pool so you can mount the lenses to the body?
Well, can we convert? Can we convert from different mounts? And is there a quality or image loss if we do a conversion? I'm still trying to get lenses for my cameras.
Yes, conversions can be done. All of our zoom lenses can bounce between the two mounts. We have a series of 6 primes, though, that are dedicated into PL. And there's companies that will do a conversion for that as well to turn them into PL. But based on the price point of those lenses, they tend to play more in the still world, and they seem to be more. There's more machines in the field in EF for us to hang them on, and when it comes to profitability, lenses are actually better than selling cameras.
Is there can I get Canon lenses to work on non-Canon cameras?
I have seen that done. I don't. Well, I should say this. So there's companies out there like Blackmagic, which make a camera, which is a competing product to us. I love it because they have our mount on it. So the number of cameras out there that we can put our lenses on is a good thing for our business model. And there are adapters like to switch between Canon and Nikon. It sort of depends on the physical mount. You can take if you've got a larger mount on the camera than the lens, you can adapt a lot of things. But if the lens barrel is bigger than the camera one, it's a little bit more tricky. But yeah, I've seen relatively inexpensive Canon to Nikon adapters. And as long as we're buying Canon lenses to put them on somebody else's cameras, that's probably not such a bad thing.
Which gets to my point, is that you don't have to buy the lens from the same person that makes the camera. You can mix and match as you see fit.
True. If you really wanted to scratch your head over this one, though, when we design a sensor, it's based on the color science of our glass as well. So the best in terms of perfection marriage usually is the lens from the company that designed the camera as well. But that said, the changes in what you see are really purely specification changes. From a creativity standpoint, you make your own decisions on that in terms of what you want that image to look like. From an engineering standpoint, we go out for the sharpest, most perfect, most lifelike reproduction of the world that you can make with an electronic camera. From a creative standpoint, imperfections are part of the image. I mean, J.J. Abrams and the ability to put lens flare. I mean, we look forever to take lens flare out of lenses, and then you go see Star Trek, and all you see is lens flare. Yeah. And he can use any camera, any lens he wants, but he's not looking for perfection. There was a wonderful cinematographer named Russell Carpenter. He did Titanic and a lot of other ones, but he worked on a film about Steve Jobs, all shot electronically, but there was Jobs in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and so on. And every 10-year period, he was looking for lenses and glass from that era, is my understanding, in order to kind of give it more of the flavor of the 60s or the 70s or the 80s. So you can really do a lot with the imperfections of glass to kind of create a mood.
Tim, really quickly, because we don't have much time, is it okay to buy a used lens and not okay to buy a used camera?
There's a much less risk in a used lens. Actually, there's a lot more value to a used lens. We made a series of cinema lenses in the 70s called the K35s, and we haven't made them in over 30 years. And that lens is still in demand. I promise you, whatever camera we built in the 70s doesn't have a ton of value left. Okay. But those lenses were beautiful pieces of glass, and they're still renting. I think if I was looking at equipment as an investment, I'd invest in lenses. If I'm looking at equipment to keep up with trends, I've got to have a camera too, but I need a business model to pay for the camera. It has to make sense. But if I'm just looking for an investment, I'd buy glass all day long.
And Tim, for people that want more information, what website can they go to learn more?
Canon, let's see, what's the best one? Let me take them right to the one for lenses. So it would be cusa.canon.com.
All right.
So www.cusa.canon.com. One N in Canon.
And Tim Smith is the Senior Film and Television Advisor for Canon. Tim, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Larry. Good seeing and talking to you again.
Thanks,
Take care. Bye-bye.